Some of the most exalted people in the Old Testament showed their humility when it came to obeying the Lord and being available for his service. Good morning. I'm Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Wednesday. You know, we see some of God's people take some pretty exalted positions in God's plan of leadership, or perhaps even in the government, in the political world where they lived. And it would seem that having an exalted position like that would make one proud and haughty and perhaps be of no use to God whatsoever because of their attitude. Well, Queen Esther was not one of those who was overtaken by her pride and her position. She is chosen to be the new queen of Persia since Queen Vashti has been booted from her throne. And Esther is obviously a captive that has been taken from the nation of Israel, perhaps even as a young child. So when her people are threatened by a decree of the king and that evil Haman, who was insulted that Mordecai, this Jew, did not bow down or pay homage to him in the streets. So Esther is called upon to speak up for the Jewish nation. Now Esther feared for her life. No one was to come before the king without being summoned, and she could certainly be killed for bringing this request to save her own Israel. But her cousin Mordecai has reminded her this wonderful statement, "Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Perhaps this is God's plan for you. And we have to remember such a time as this may also come in our lives. When God wants to use us, we need to be available. So she devises a plan to speak to the king and to try to overcome the murder warrant that's been put out for her people, plotted by Haman, the Secretary of State, who apparently hated the Jews. And her statement to her cousin Mordecai shows her complete surrender to God when she says, "Go and gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." The call for fasting among her people shows her dependence on God, even though God is really not mentioned by name once in this whole book of Esther. She's not going forward on her own power, her own might, or her cunning, but she is calling for God's grace in this situation. She has devised a plan to turn the king against Haman and over on her side. But ultimately, it all depends on whether God will move in the king's heart. Her statement, "If I perish, I perish." It shows her great confidence in God's sovereignty in this situation. Although she has been elevated to the position of queen over all of Persia, she is still humble enough to realize that God is always ultimately in control in this world. Her plan works, and she is able to overcome Haman and his plan to kill her people. As a matter of fact, this evil Haman is finally hanged on the same gallows that he built for her cousin Mordecai. Her Jewish nation is rescued from the horrible decree by Haman to slay them all. And this poor little servant girl is celebrated annually now by the Jewish people because of her bravery and her humility, saying, "God, if you can use me, great. And if I perish, I perish." I wonder if we could say that today. Whatever the cost, I want to be used by God. And I want to surrender and humble myself in his service.